Okay, so today is the next in the series of knit-like crochet stitches, or rather crochet stitches that look closer to a knitted stitch. And today we're going to be talking about techniques in the round, and this month's techniques in the round are going to be basically a play off of last month's, basically the same sort of technique but flat. So for example, I'm going to show you how to do a knooking piece in the round. So last time we did it just a flat straight piece of material, and this is going to be what I do this time. Again, as usual, I'm going to be using a locker hook or a knooking hook, depending on what you want to call it, and this is a 4mm. The next is going to be the waistcoat stitch. Now this is the waistcoat stitch. It's a traditional crochet hook use. This is also a 4mm or a size G. And last week, if you remember correctly, we did it in the flat, and you could see how the ends had a bunch of extra yarn coming off of it, because each time you made a pass, you had to cut the yarn and then tie it in and begin again. Well, when you work a waistcoat, traditionally it's pretty much worked in the round like this. So there's going to be no cutting of yarn. We just continue working in the round and we get a piece like this. Now this, of course, is a heavier, thicker piece than what you might see in terms of the piece made with a knooking hook. So for example, this piece I used approximately 8 of yarn, and this piece right here was approximately 10-ish, 11, not quite 11 grams of yarn. So you can kind of see the difference in the tightness, and this of course is a thicker piece of material, and this is rather thin, just like what you would expect with your standard knitted piece. And then finally, I'm going to be doing a Tunisian crochet, right? So you can see this Tunisian is quite a bit thicker. And for this piece, because it is in the round, and that's a little different in terms of working a Tunisian piece, and so I'll explain more about that when we get to it. But for this one, I'm going to be using a Tunisian hook with a cable. And this is also a 4mm or a size G US hook. So for those of you who know, you know. For those of you who don't know, my name is Sig. And of course, you are always welcome here at Crochet and Fiber, where we talk all things crochet, fiber, yarn, do a little tutorializing. Maybe I can talk today. We'll see how that goes. And this week's tutorial and or discussion, however you really want to look at it, is that week of the month that I show you a couple of different techniques of crocheting that actually looks like knitted pieces. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, I would be thrilled if you would hit the subscribe bar, notification bell, and like buttons. Okay, so let's just get this show on the road and learn a few techniques today. So I'm going to begin by showing you how to do a waistcoat stitch in the round. So for this example, I'm simply going to chain 20. You, of course, can chain as many as you like or want to. Really is going to depend on your preference. And of course, this is going to be a great technique if you're looking for a relatively thick, tight, cylindrical piece. So whether it's going to be maybe the body or the leg or the arms of an amigurumi, it can also certainly be the body of a sweater if you're going to work that sweater starting from the bottom up. And maybe you're going to make your sleeves that way if you're going to start from the bottom, or in other words, the cuff up. Also, it's going to be good if you just wanted to make a really long tube and, let's say, make basically a double-sided scarf, or a scarf that's worked in the round. It's just a very long cylinder. You could also do it in order to, make a hat. So this is just one of those stitches. It's basic stitch. It's a simple stitch. And you just keep on going with this stitch until you get to the length and width of the cylinder you're looking to create. So we're going to begin. So I got the stitches that I want. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a ring. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to slip stitch into that first chain. Now, once I've created my ring and I was careful not to get my chain length twisted, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert my hook into that same stitch, yarn over. I'm going to pull up that loop, yarn over again, and I'm going to create my first single crochet. And then I'm going to single crochet in each of the chains following that until this first round is complete. So 2, and then 3, 4. So now that I've completed round 1, and you can see I'm right back here, back to this very first single crochet of round 1. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take my hook, I'm going to insert it right here between these 2 bars or legs, and then I'm going to slip stitch. I'm going to chain 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a single crochet into that same space. And that'll be my first single crochet for round 2. I'm going to continue on to place each single crochet in between the bars of each stitch. I'm going to insert my hook right here between these 2 legs. And I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pull that loop through, yarn over, I'm going to pull that loop through those 2 loops. And I've got my second single crochet. And then again, I'm going to do it with the next stitch. And I'm going to continue on until I've completed round 2. Just like that, right here in between these 2 bars. Yarn over, pull that yarn through, yarn over, pull that yarn through those 2 loops. Okay, so now that I've completed round 2, I'm going to do just like what I did when I was transitioning to round 1 to round 2. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to insert my hook again right here into this space right between these 2 bars. Yarn over and pull that yarn through. I'm going to create a slip stitch. And I'm going to chain 1. And in that same stitch, I'm going to make my first single crochet. Now, there are different ways to transition, but for the sake of this video, I'm just showing you this one way to transition between rows. And then again, I'm going to continue on to round 3. So I've transitioned to my round 3, and now I'm going to continue as before in round 2, and I'm going to insert my hook between these 2 bars, yarn over, pull that yarn through, yarn over, and then create my next single crochet. Now you can see where I'm getting that knit look. And I will continue on just this way until I've gotten the length that I'm looking to get with this particular stitch. Now this is a nice sturdy stitch. The Tunisian stitch is a nice sturdy stitch as well. The Nook stitch is going to be more of your standard netting stitch. So it's going to have that thinness and that kind of stretchability that you find in a knitted material. Now the next technique I'm going to show you is going to be the nooking technique, and I have my locker hook or nook hook. And basically what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to chain probably about 30 for the sake of this demonstration. So 1, 2, 3. So now that I have a chain of 30, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create a ring. And again, I'm going to make a slip stitch right here into the first chain. And I'm going to be careful not to twist my chain. And because this is nooking, what I'm going to then do is I'm going to basically cast on my stitches for each chain here. So it's going to look a lot like if you're familiar with Tunisian crochet. So basically I've got my first stitch, and then I'm going to go through, I'm going to pull up a loop in the next chain. I'm going to continue on to the chain after that and pull up a loop. I'm going to continue on to the chain after that and pull up a loop. And I'm going to do this until I really can't go any farther, because I've got this hook that's going to get kind of in the way. It's going to prevent me from, again, completing the circle, but I'll show you what to do when that happens. Okay, so let's say I'm at that point. What I want to do then, I want to just go ahead and pull my hook through and pull through some of that cording and just leave it just like so. And then I'm going to continue as before, start pulling up my loops until I've completed the circle. Basically, this is my foundation row. Okay, so I'm pretty much completed my round. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull this all the way through. And now you can see where the cord sort of wraps through the internal side of these kind of cast on loops. And that's the completion of my foundation row. And I'm going to begin, or round rather, and then I'm going to go ahead and begin round 1, and I'm going to do a knit stitch. So in the last video for a knit look in crochet, when you work the knit or the nooking knit stitch, I guess is a better way of putting it, in the flat, your facing side you're going to work with the knit, and then your backing side or the wrong side of your work is going to be a purl stitch. So your front face is going to be the knit stitch, and then you flip your work over, and then that's going to be the purl stitch on the back. When you're working it in the round, you only will be working with the facing piece of your work, right? With the right side of your work facing you. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to work a knit stitch for each stitch, and I'm going to work this piece in a spiral. So this is probably a good time to just go ahead and throw your, if you're going to work with a stitch marker, you just put your stitch marker right here. This will just let you know as you're going along that this is where your work basically begins, where your round begins. And you just work your stitch marker up each time you get to it, you know your round has ended. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute. So I'm not going to pull this through yet. I'm going to wait till I've completed the first round of this work before I pull this cording through. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do a knit stitch, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hook and I'm going to hook over the loop just like that. I'm going to twist a little bit, and then I'm going to use that hook with my yarn under, and I'm going to pull that through. So that's going to be my first knit. And then the next knit, again, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hook over that loop. I'm going to yarn under that hook, and I'm going to pull that loop through. That's going to be my second knit. And I'm going to continue doing just that until I can't go any farther. So I'm going to do this for a few more stitches, and then so you can see. So then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to simply pull my cording through. I'm going to continue on just like that until I get to the end of my round. Okay, so now I'm coming to the end of round 1 here, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how I handle that stitch marker and then the extra cording. So here I'm right here at this last stitch. For round 1, and I'm simply going to take my hook, I'm going to insert it into the center of that stitch marker. I'm going to pull my cording through, and then I'm going to come down here to this bottom cording, and I'm going to pull that all the way through. So that's going to pull my loose end all the way through, just like so. Now I have my round 1 completed. I'm going to shorten up that tail just a little bit so I still have enough cording to work with, but not so little that it pulls through as I'm working. And now I'm ready to start on my second round. And as I mentioned before, we're going to basically be working in a spiral. Let me get my hook threaded again. I'm going to be working into a spiral. So there's nothing really special you have to do except to continue with your knit stitch. And again, just continue on with round 2. So now again, coming up on the end of round 2. And then just as before with round 1, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to insert my hook into that stitch marker just like so, just through the center. And now I'm ready to go ahead and pull on that lower cording until the tail is pulled all the way through that round 1. And just tighten that up just a hair. There we go. And then you can see now I'm ready to start with round 3. You can already see that knitted look that's already occurring, and I'll continue just like that until this piece is the length that I would like it to be. Now for this one, I'll show you one more thing just because it is knooking, and that is how to bind off. So for those of you who don't know, when I say bind off, or when you read bind off really, it's basically just how to finish up these edges when you've reached the length of material that you're looking to complete. And really what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to insert my hook into that loop. And then I'm just going to go ahead, I'm just going to pull, or make a slip stitch rather, is probably the easiest way to explain it. And then I'm just going to go to the next loop. I'm going to insert my hook from right to left if I'm right-handed, and I'm going to yarn over, and then I'm just going to pull that yarn through both loops and make a slip stitch. And I'm going to continue on just like that all the way around. And what that does is that binds off my raw edges there so that, of course, it doesn't unravel, right? So really, you're just basically slip stitching each one of those open loops. And so here I'll show you really quickly. I just go ahead and pull that tail through, and you can see how I've now bound off that edging. And I'll do that all the way around, and when I've completed my round of binding, I'm simply going to join and then weave in any ends that I might have to weave in. Okay, let's move on to the Tunisian knit stitch. Okay, now for this stitch, I'm going to use my Tunisian hook that is basically a cable. And this front part of my hook, this body, is basically your standard crochet hook size with the cable for you who don't know, that just goes ahead and screws off like this. Now, if you're looking to buy a set of crochet hooks, I did a review on this particular set while I was explaining other hooks. So this came up in that particular video, and I'll link that video below if you're interested in watching it. And this is just one of those hooks that's really versatile, right? So I can use this hook for Tunisian crochet. I can use it for regular crocheting, and potentially or ideally, I could also use this hook for nooking. So you have a nice point and you have a fairly decent neck on this particular brand of hooking, which is going to make it nice for nooking. Now, some people make the cord work. I don't like working with a cord in a nooking stitch. I would rather use the standard cording that you saw on my 4mm locker hook, my nooking hook. So you see this one right here. I would rather work with this particular cording because it's very flexible and it's slick, and so it moves through my work quite nicely, and it really doesn't get in my way, and it's not very fiddly. So I prefer this. But potentially, if you were interested, you could actually use the long cord attachment and do your nooking with a regular cable. I know people do it. So I'm throwing that out there for you so that you can decide for yourself how to do that. But this particular set of crochet hooks, I pretty much use it exclusively for when I'm making a Tunisian crochet piece. And so with that said, when I'm working a Tunisian simple knit stitch in the round, and if you look it up in the round, you're going to see something that looks more like a circle, not in a traditional sense of a round as you've seen me working it right here today. So when I refer to working it in the round today, this is what I'm referring it to, it being basically, you know, a circle, a cylinder. Again, this could be used for sleeves, it could be used for legs, it could be used for the body of a sweater if you're working the sweater from the bottom up. It could be used for a very thick hat, like, you know, winter beanie hat. The Tunisian stitch is quite a thick stitch, so it's going to be very warm, it's going to be very sturdy. I particularly like a Tunisian stitch when I'm making handles on, oh, let's say a purse. It gives it a lot of structure, it gives it a lot of strength. And I just like how well the material holds together, because a lot of times if you're making a purse, they give you instructions to use your basic crochet stitch, making the handle, and inevitably it always ends up being way too stretchy, or it just doesn't have any strength, it doesn't hold its shape. I find that Tunisian stitches work beautifully for this, so it's something to keep in mind. So quickly, I'm just going to simply explain that this Tunisian stitch, working this in this particular kind of round, in this cylinder shape, gets a little fiddly. So unless my hook was really short, I'm not going to be able to make a small cylinder. What I am able to make is a larger round or cylinder shape. So you can kind of see here what I've got going on. This is quite a thick fabric, but it's going to be nice if you're making anything like a pillow, anything like a hat, anything like even a really thick sweater if you're working it from the bottom up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly show you how to cast on and how to do a basic Tunisian knit stitch over here with my loose yarn, just to kind of show you, because I've already got this started for the next process of this. And then I'm going to move over to this larger piece so I can show you how I join my rows, because really this piece comes out in the round, but by the nature of a Tunisian stitch, I'm going to be working still in my forward and my return pass rows. Okay. And I'll show you what I mean right now for those of you who don't know exactly what I'm trying to explain here, because you're not that familiar with a Tunisian stitch. So as before, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to chain the chains that I need. And just a quick little tip, because of the length of your standard hook, you're really going to, as I said before, you're going to need a lot of chains. But here, I'm not going to do that. I'm only going to do a few chains for the sake of showing you how to do a forward and return pass for the knit stitch. So I'm going to begin simply by casting on. So I've got the amount of chains that I want. I'm going to imagine that I've just joined my chains into a ring without twisting my length of chain, and I've slip stitched my ring together, essentially joining it. Now, instead of continuing forward like I might with the knooking technique, I'm going to then start doing my return pass. So now once I've got my ring together and I've slip stitched it together, I have my loop up, I'm going to begin my cast on. And basically I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull a loop up in each stitch, just like I did with the knooking. But what makes this different than the knooking is this is going to be considered my first row, my first forward pass. And then once I've completed the length of chain for my first row, even if it is in a circle, I'm then going to start working my return pass. So I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to pull that through the first loop. And then after that, yarn over, I'm going to pull it through the next 2 loops. Yarn over it, the next 2 loops. Yarn over, I'm going to pull it through the next 2 loops. And yarn over, I'm going to pull it through the next 2 loops. I'm going to continue that until I have 1 loop left on my hook, just like so. Now I'm going to begin my forward pass again. And hang tight, because when I bring up the bigger piece to work on, I'm going to show you how I tie the 2 sides of my fabric together to keep that regular cylindrical shape going. So next, what I'm going to do, because this is the knit stitch, I'm going to start row 3. So my first pass was row 1, and then my return pass was row 2. Now I'm going to start my row 3, and this is where I really begin the knit stitch. So I'm going to take my hook, and basically I think you can see there's this bar here in front, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my hook and I'm going to, from the right, I'm going to insert it right there behind that bar, and I'm going to put my hook right through to the back of the work. So let me get this loop back on my hook. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to insert my hook. I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to pull that loop up. So again, I'm going to insert my hook right here behind this front bar, and then I'm going to carry it through to the back. I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to pull that loop up. I'm going to continue doing that for the length of this piece. This is row 3. It's a forward pass. And you can see that I've gotten it completed, and now I'm going to do my return pass. And the return pass is pretty much always the same. It's going to be a yarn over and pull it through that first loop. And then after that, it's going to be a yarn over and pull it through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull it through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull it through 2 loops. And I'm going to continue just like that until I have 1 loop left on my hook. And that'll be the completion of row 4. One more time, row 5. Because I already have my loop ready to go on that first stitch, I'm going to begin with my second stitch. And I'm going to pull up a loop. And then, of course, into the third, pull up a loop. Pull up a loop. And continue on to complete my row 5. And then I'm going to do my return pass. There's going to be a yarn over and through the first loop. Then yarn over through the 2 loops. 2, 2, all the way until I have 1 loop left on my hook. And that'll be basically the completion of 3 rows, and you can see that knit stitch already taking place. So let's switch over to this big piece, and I'm going to then show you how I continue this piece completely in the round without having to sew up any seams. Okay, so Tunisian has a tendency to roll, especially when you first get your fabric started. So this is a fabric that you definitely have to think in terms of locking. But we're going to go ahead, and I've got my first several forward and backward passes done. You can see a little bit of the seam going on here from behind. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making my forward pass of my Tunisian stitch that I just showed you how to do. I'm going to work my way around. And then through the magic of video, you will see here in about 2 seconds what the whole piece looks like on this hook and cable before I start making my return pass. Okay, so now you can see I'm coming to the end of my round where the one side meets the other side. Right here, just like so. And what I'm going to do is, so you see where the end of my cable sits right here against the beginning of my round. I'm going to simply in that first stitch of the round, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull a loop through. And then I'm going to yarn over. And in this case, I'm going to pull that yarn through 2 loops on my hook. So normally if I'm working this stitch in the flat, I'm going to begin by pulling my hook through 1 loop. But when I'm working in the round like this, once I've connected it to the beginning of my round, I'm going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to continue to pull that through 2 loops just as I normally would as I start to work on making my return pass. And then this will be my last pass. So it would be my last return pass. And then I'll show you how I would bind off this piece of work. So let me finish with my return pass, and I will meet you right back here in about 2 seconds. Okay, so I've made my return pass back down to where I only have the 1 loop on my hook. Now, because I'm going to bind off at this point, I can actually just go ahead and remove this cable just to kind of get it out of my way because I don't need it anymore. And I'm simply going to just bind this off. Now, to bind this off, I'm going to insert my hook just as if I was making a forward pass with a knit stitch. And then yarn over, I'm going to pull that yarn through. And instead of keeping that loop on the hook, I'm going to continue to pull it through the hook, the loop that's already on the hook. So I'm going to show it to you again. I'm going to take my hook, I'm going to insert it into my work just as if I were making a knit stitch. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pull that loop through, and then I'm going to continue to pull it through the loop that's on the hook. So I basically just want to end up with 1 loop on the hook as I work my way along the edge of this piece in order to bind it off. Just like so. Basically, I'm making my Tunisian knit stitch, but I'm bringing it back through to just create a kind of slip stitch that binds off my work. And that's all there is to it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and I'm going to give you my goodbyes and thank you for joining me for another episode of Crochet and Fiber with Sig. That would be me. I know, talking about myself in the third person. I don't know if that's entertaining or concerning. I guess it all depends on your perspective. But anywho, I want to wish you a most wonderful, wonderful week. And until the next video, you go ahead and have a fabulous day. Bye-bye now.